When Maye Musk walked onto the set of The View, she expected a respectful conversation about nutrition and dignity. Instead, she found herself face to face with Joy Behar, armed with a smirk, a hidden agenda, and one cruel question that stunned the entire studio. What followed wasn't just a clash of opinions, it was a public reckoning that tore through television screens and left millions questioning who truly holds the power, and who hides behind a microphone to tear others down. The lights in the studio seemed brighter than usual that morning, almost harsh in their clarity. Maye stepped onto the stage with quiet confidence, dressed in a pale slate suit that mirrored her calm demeanor. As she approached the table, a round of polite applause swelled and faded. She took her seat across from the panel of hosts with practiced grace, nodding politely. Sunny Hostin greeted her warmly, offering a smile that reached her eyes. The other hosts followed suit, except for one. Joy Behar didn't clap. She didn't nod. Her eyes followed Maye with a sort of sharpness that felt more curious than kind. On the desk in front of her lay a small blue folder, unmarked, unofficial. The camera caught it in passing, then moved on. Sunny leaned forward, launching the conversation. "Maye, thank you for being here. You've been leading the Nutrition for Dignity campaign for over a year now. Can you tell us what inspired it?" Maye smiled, folding her hands gently in her lap. It began with a letter. From a woman in Detroit. Lilia, 83. Her husband passed away last spring. He always cooked, and she never had to learn. When he died, she survived on canned soup for months. One night, she fainted in her kitchen. Malnourished. The room quieted. Even the background music lowered slightly, as if it, too, was listening. "She told me she felt invisible," Maye continued. "She said, I didn't know people like me were allowed to matter once we became old." That line stuck with me. There was something about the way Maye spoke. She didn't plead for attention. She didn't overreach. Her words carried weight because they came without performance. The audience wasn't cheering, but they were leaning forward, listening. Joy shifted in her chair, arms crossed loosely, eyes narrowed. Her lips moved as if mouthing the words before they were spoken. She tapped her pen twice on the table. A cue, perhaps. Or just impatience. Maye went on, describing how the program had helped over 200 women across 5 cities. Basic nutrition, human contact, dignity through small routines. "And how old are you now, Maye?" Joy asked suddenly, her voice light. The question sliced through the calm like cold wind under a door. Maye blinked once. Not in shock, but in recognition. The shift had begun. Not in tone, but in intent. The lights were still bright, but the temperature in the room had dropped. Just enough for the audience to notice. Just enough to sense that something was coming. Something not in the script. Maye didn't answer right away. The question about her age still hung in the air like condensation on glass, clear, but lingering. She folded her hands more tightly in her lap, offered a soft, practiced smile, and looked towards Sunny, as if to re-anchor the conversation. But before Sunny could speak, Joy leaned forward. "It's actually quite impressive," Joy said, her voice lilting in a way that didn't quite sound sincere. "Truly. Most people at your age are enjoying retirement, gardening, grandkids, maybe a cruise or two. Not launching nutrition campaigns and giving lectures." There was a laugh somewhere in the audience. Small, unsure. It died quickly. Joy went on. "I mean, it's wonderful that you're staying active. I just always thought modeling was something people, aged out of." Maye looked at her then. Not sharply. Not defensively. Just a long, quiet glance. A look that didn't blink or back away. Across the table, Sarah Haynes shifted in her seat, her eyes darting to Whoopi, then back to her cue cards. Sunny cleared her throat gently, pen poised to jump in. But neither spoke. Joy smiled. It was thin, deliberate. A smile not made of humor, but of edges. "I mean," she continued, tapping a finger on her notepad, "you were a model, right? It's just that most people don't keep that kind of visibility after, well, a certain point." There was a pause. A heavy, structured silence. Even the hum of studio equipment seemed to dip. Joy filled it. And look, I'm not saying you're not still trying. But at some point, doesn't it make more sense to pass the mic to someone younger? Someone with a bit more relevance. That word, relevance, hung heavier than all the rest. A laugh tried to break out in the audience again. This time, it didn't even make it to the first row. The tension in the room was no longer subtle. It was tactile. You could almost feel it humming in the floor beneath their feet. May exhaled slowly, and for a moment, it seemed she might answer. But Joy wasn't done. She sat back in her chair, arms folded, and delivered the final jab with a tone of mock curiosity. Do you ever worry that by staying in the spotlight this long, you're taking up space that might belong to someone else? The studio froze. This wasn't banter. This wasn't tough questioning. This was personal. The control room, watching from behind soundproof glass, didn't cut to commercial. They didn't signal the hosts. No one moved. It was the kind of silence that vibrated. May sat still, unmoved, but not untouched. It wasn't the question. It was the framing. The suggestion that her very presence, her voice, her experience, her efforts, were no longer of value. That she should retreat quietly to the margins and make room for someone deemed more palatable, more marketable, more young. She blinked once. Her fingers loosened slightly around the base of her wrist. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. But it didn't come yet. Joy watched her, waiting, expecting the usual deflection. A polite laugh. A graceful pivot. But May gave her neither. Instead, she looked to the audience. Not directly at anyone, but just beyond them. As if she saw someone else standing there. Someone who had heard that same question, not on camera, but in an office, a family gathering, a job interview. Someone who had been told, in fewer words but with the same precision, "You've had your time." Joy shifted in her seat. Only slightly. But it was the first time she moved without purpose. Whatever answer May was about to give, it would not be rehearsed. And it would not be soft. Not anymore. May didn't rush. She let the weight of Joy's questions settle into the corners of the room, into the silence that had become so loud it seemed to vibrate through the walls. She sat there, hands still folded gently in her lap, spine straight, eyes calm, not braced for impact, but braced in something else. Something steadier than pride. Then she smiled. It was small. Almost imperceptible. But it wasn't bitter, and it wasn't amused. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they've seen the same scene play out too many times to be surprised by it anymore. She looked at Joy, not confrontationally, but clearly. Then her voice, low and composed, filled the silence. "You know," she said softly, "if I were 35 and saying these same things, you might be applauding." The words didn't land with force. They didn't need to. They floated out across the room and somehow settled into every chair, every pause, every set of eyes. The camera shifted gently, as if leaning in. But because my hair is silver, and my skin has lines, suddenly the message becomes inconvenient. She didn't blink. She didn't smile again. She let the sentence hang, just long enough for its shape to take root. Joy shifted again, lips parting as if to interrupt. But May didn't stop. "Age is not a disqualification," she continued, voice steady. "It's not a burden or a fault or a reason to step aside and make space for someone more photogenic. It's simply a measure of how long we've been carrying the weight." A few rows back in the audience, a woman in her 60s leaned forward. She wasn't the only one. "Do you know how many women I've met who stopped speaking, not because they had nothing left to say, but because no one looked at them when they did?" No one moved. Not on stage. Not behind the cameras. Joy's fingers had stilled on the table. "I didn't come here to defend my presence," May said, voice quieter now, but heavier somehow. "I came to talk about a program that's feeding elderly women whose lives have been erased from the conversation. Women who spent decades caring for families, communities, classrooms, only to be told that now, their value has expired." Sarah's eyes dropped to her hands. Whoopi stared straight ahead. "And I'm not here because of nostalgia," May added. "I'm here because I still have something to give. And I'm not alone." For the first time since the segment began, a full second passed before anyone even breathed. Maye turned her gaze away from Joy. Not dismissively, but finally. She looked toward the audience. And beyond them, as if through the lens. As if there was someone watching on the other side of that camera who needed to hear it more than anyone in the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't point fingers. She simply spoke like someone who was done asking for permission to speak. Behind her, a screen in the studio still read Nutrition for Dignity. But in that moment, the conversation had become about something far broader. Something deeper. And for the first time, it was no longer Maye who looked exposed. It was the table, the stage, the format, and the quiet look of someone who thought they were in control. Until they weren't. Joy's lips curled, just slightly. The kind of smirk that isn't meant to be seen as cruel, but is. The kind that hides behind plausible deniability and morning show charm. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice lower now, more deliberate. "You're only relevant because of your son. Elon Musk is why you're sitting at this table. If he weren't your child, would anyone here even know your name?" The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was wounded. One of the younger hosts, her mouth half open, leaned forward as if to interject, maybe to soften the blow, maybe to change the subject, but Joy raised her hand, palm out, without looking. A signal to stop. A boundary drawn in real time. Maye didn't move. But her hand, still resting on the microphone, tightened ever so slightly. Her knuckles turned pale beneath the studio lights. It wasn't the first time she had heard something like that. It likely wouldn't be the last. But hearing it here, in front of an audience, framed as if it were a reasonable observation, it dug deeper. Because it wasn't just a statement. It was a dismissal of every hour she had lived before the world decided her son was worthy of attention. She looked down, briefly, and then back up. Her eyes met Joy's, not cold, not angry, just precise. "You're right," Maye said quietly. "I'm not famous because of me." Joy leaned back slightly, as if surprised by the agreement. "I'm famous because I raised a child who changed the world. Alone. Without help. Without privilege. Without safety." Her voice didn't shake. It never once rose. But the room got smaller. "I was a single mother. In South Africa. I left an abusive marriage with 3 children and 1 suitcase. I worked 5 jobs, slept in a tiny apartment with no heat, no car, and some nights, no dinner." She let that sit. No dramatics. No swelling strings. Just truth, sharp and clear. "I walked to work. I studied nutrition at night. I took modeling jobs not because they were glamorous, but because they helped me pay for shoes." Another pause. The air was beginning to feel heavier now. Not because of volume, but because of gravity. "And yes, Elon is brilliant," she added. "But brilliance doesn't appear in a vacuum. It's built. It's fed. It's protected. And when he was 12 and being bullied for being different, I didn't call a publicist. I sat with him on the floor and taught him how to code." Someone in the audience exhaled audibly. It wasn't a gasp. It was something slower. More human. Joy didn't smile this time. She didn't move. Maye leaned forward now, just slightly. Still calm. Still exact. "And for the record, Joy, your team emailed me 3 times to come on this show. Not to talk about Elon. To talk about aging, dignity, and healthcare. Your words. Not mine." Her eyes flicked to the blue folder still sitting untouched in front of Joy. "I said no, twice. I don't like cameras very much. And I certainly don't like being invited just to be dismissed." Now the weight shifted. Now the silence didn't just belong to the audience. It belonged to the set. The lights. The walls. The very format of the show. Joy reached for her pen. It was a small movement, but it betrayed her. Maye didn't flinch. "I came because I thought, just maybe, someone watching at home might need to see what it looks like when a woman doesn't apologize for still being here." Her voice softened again, not from retreat, but from fullness. "And I think it's time you ask yourself why that bothers you so much, The younger host who had tried to speak earlier looked down at her notes, then quietly turned them over. The studio crew didn't move. The producers in the control booth didn't speak. The moment had crossed a line none of them could reel back in. And for the first time, the person being questioned wasn't the one under scrutiny. It was the questioner. And she knew it. The room didn't reset. It didn't breathe. Whatever rhythm the show once had, those cues and quips and commercial breaks, had been stripped away. What remained now was silence, not empty but loaded, like the pause before a storm that's already on the horizon. Maye sat still for a moment, letting her words settle in the bones of the room. Joy stared at her with a face too still to be composed. And then, slowly, Maye turned her gaze, not toward Joy this time, but to the women sitting beside her. One by one. She didn't rush. Her eyes moved to the younger host first, the one who had tried to speak earlier but had been silenced by a raised hand. The young woman looked up, just for a second, and Maye nodded almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a confrontation. It was a signal. Then Maye spoke again, her voice soft, but stripped of all pleasantries. How long do you think you have left here? The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud. But it landed with more force than anything Joy had said all morning. The younger host blinked. Her lips parted, then closed again. No answer came. Maye turned her head slightly, addressing the entire panel now, her voice steady as stone. Be honest. How many years until they tell you you're too old for this chair? Too soft-spoken? Too opinionated? Or maybe not opinionated enough? A ripple moved through the audience, but no sound followed. She leaned in, just a fraction, her tone sharpening, not with anger, but with clarity. How long until they replace you with someone whose face is tighter, whose laugh is louder, and whose contract costs less? Sarah looked down. Whoopi remained frozen, but her fingers, resting on the edge of the table, curled in just slightly. Maye didn't blink. This show is branded as a space for women of all generations. But the truth is, we all know what happens when a woman dares to age out loud. No one tried to interrupt. No one dared. They ask her to smile more, to speak less, to wear something younger. And if she doesn't play along, they say she's bitter, difficult, out of touch. She paused. Not for effect. For breath. I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because I'm stubborn. Because I've refused to shrink. Her eyes circled back to Joy, but just for a second. And it scares people, especially women in power, when another woman stops apologizing for her age. Joy finally shifted again, her lips pressing together, but the words that had once come so easily to her seemed locked behind a clenched jaw. Maye looked away from her. I didn't come to shame anyone, she said. But I do want to ask this, why is it always the women tearing each other down? The room flinched. She turned back to the younger host, her voice gentler now. Don't let them turn you into a weapon against yourself. The woman looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the segment began. She didn't nod. She didn't cry. But her shoulders shifted, just slightly, as if something invisible had been lifted. Maye turned her attention to the camera. The red light was on, signaling that it was live, streaming to millions. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't square her shoulders like a performer. She just spoke, the way someone speaks when they are done performing altogether. I'm not sitting here because I believe I'm immune to time. I'm sitting here to say that age is not a flaw. It's not something to fix or fear or hide. She looked down at the table, where her own hands rested. Then back to the lens. It is not a weakness to grow older. The weakness is in a culture that treats aging like a threat. In the control room, someone muttered a curse under their breath. They weren't sure whether to cut to commercial or let this unfold. But they didn't move. Maye took one last breath. We talk about progress. About empowering women. But empowerment isn't platforming someone young and photogenic while silencing the women who've already lived through the battles you're still learning to name. Her words weren't rehearsed. They weren't polished. They were raw. And for that very reason, they were impossible to dismiss. I don't want applause, she said finally. I want us to stop pretending that a woman has to disappear to make room for someone else." And then, just like that, she stopped talking. She didn't smile. She didn't fill the silence. Because the silence, at last, was saying everything it needed to say. Maye's last words had left the studio hollowed out. Not destroyed, not scorched, just stripped bare. No one reached for their coffee mugs. No one shuffled papers. The usual buzz that kept talk shows humming had been silenced, and in its place was something far more rare: reverence. Then she turned. Not to Joy. Not to the panel. Not to the audience seated in their perfect rows under soft lighting. She turned to the lens. The red light above the main camera glowed like a heartbeat, steady and small, and yet somehow, it became the only point in the room that mattered. Maye looked into it. And not the way most guests did, not with the polished charm of someone trained to hit a mark. She looked into it the way someone does when they are no longer speaking to a camera, but to a person. One person. Maybe 100. Maybe 1,000,000. But always one. Her voice, when it came, was not smooth. It caught, slightly, on the first word. Not from nerves, not from weakness, but from weight. "Last week," she said, "I received a letter." She paused, eyes still fixed forward. It was handwritten. The envelope was shaky. I almost missed it. Her fingers rested on the table now, unmoving. It was from a woman in Kansas City. 61. She had worked at the same dental office for 27 years. She was let go last month. Another pause. Not because of misconduct. Not because of her performance. Her boss told her it was time to bring in someone with a fresher look. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The camera didn't cut away. She wrote, "I was told my silver hair made the patients feel old. That I should dye it or retire quietly." The air in the studio grew still again, but this was different. This wasn't silence born of conflict. It was the silence people give when they are learning something they already knew but had never heard spoken aloud. "I read it 3 times, Maye said. Not because it surprised me, but because it didn't." She inhaled gently, once, and her voice steadied. There are millions of women, right now, who are being erased with a smile and a memo. Not because they've failed, but because they've aged. Behind her, the screen that once showed nutrition for dignity flickered. Quietly, without cue, the words "I am still here" appeared in the corner. No fanfare. No music swell. Just white text, simple, small, but clear. "If you're watching this," Maye continued, "and you've stopped raising your hand in meetings, if you've started adding emojis to your emails so they don't think you're angry, if you've been told you're intimidating when you're just informed, if you've begun to believe that the world has already made room for everyone but you," she let the sentence taper. Then, she leaned in slightly. "I want you to know that I see you." Her voice didn't rise. It narrowed. Focused. "I'm here today for you." She nodded, as if affirming not just her words but the fact that she meant every single one. "You are not expired. You are not a burden. You are not invisible." There was a shuffling sound from the crew off camera. Someone had put down a clipboard. Someone else had stopped breathing through their mouth. Maye didn't look away. "I spent most of my life being told to wait my turn. To lower my voice. To smile more. I'm done waiting. And I'm certainly done whispering." Her hands moved now, one gently covering the other, almost like a resting heartbeat. "I don't speak for everyone. But I speak for those who don't get invited to the table. For the women who have been labeled too old, too plain, too sharp, too loud, too much." A long beat. Then one more. For the women who taught themselves new skills after 50. Who went back to school while raising grandkids. Who started businesses out of their kitchens. Who held families together after funerals no one else showed up for. She looked directly into the lens now. Not past it. Not above it. Right into it. If you're hiding because you think the world no longer wants to see you, this is me, refusing to disappear. The hashtag flickered again in the corner. But this time, the audience noticed. The first phones came up, quietly. The first tweet was sent before she even finished speaking. "I am not here to demand space. I am here to remind you that we never needed permission to exist in the first place." Her voice dropped slightly now, more intimate, like a confession shared across a quiet room. "We built this world. We carried it. We buried too many to count. We cleaned the messes no one talks about. And we did it without applause." A hush moved across the room, not descending, but rising, like reverence meeting air. "And still," she whispered, "we're told to make room." She leaned back finally, not in retreat, but in return. Her final words were not addressed to the panel. Not even to the camera. They were for the women who never got the microphone. "I'm not here because I belong on TV," she said. "I'm here because you do." And with that, she stopped. No one clapped. No one dared. The microphone touched the table with a soft click, barely audible beneath the weight of what had just been said. Maye Musk rose from her seat with no haste, no flourish. Just a quiet, unbroken motion that seemed to carry with it all the gravity the room could no longer contain. For a moment, no one moved. Not the hosts. Not the audience. Not the crew. It was as if the entire set had forgotten how to breathe. Then Joy stood abruptly. "Don't you walk away from me," she snapped, her voice cracking against the silence. "We're not finished here." But Maye didn't stop. She didn't turn. She walked past the curve of the table, past the camera tracks, past the cue cards and studio marks on the floor. Each step echoed just faintly, like the ticking of a clock that had finally started running out on someone else. The studio doors parted slowly, and daylight poured in, not the sterile gleam of a spotlight, but real light. Warm. Uneven. Uncontrolled. It spilled across the floor, washing over the back of Maye's suit as she moved forward, her silhouette growing brighter with each step until she was no longer framed by the studio but by something far more honest. Joy shouted again, but this time the words stumbled. They sounded smaller than they had seconds earlier, like someone arguing with a closed door. She looked around the studio, expecting someone, anyone, to echo her. But no one did. Not her co-hosts. Not the producers. Not even the audience. The camera turned toward her, and in that instant, everything reversed. She stood alone now. A red face beneath too much powder. Hands clenched at her sides. Voice caught in her throat. Maye never looked back. The doors closed slowly behind her, the lights slipping away as the studio lights flickered back into dominance. But something had changed. The light on the set felt colder now. Brighter, but emptier. A stage illuminated, but void of meaning. Behind the desk, Joy lowered herself back into her seat, visibly rattled, eyes darting for the next cue that never came. The broadcast didn't end with a jingle. It didn't cut to commercial. It just lingered. The frame hung on an empty chair and a full silence, as if even the cameras had learned what dignity looks like when it refuses to stay seated. And for the millions watching at home, it wasn't Joy's voice they remembered. It was the sound of nothing. The sound of someone leaving without needing to say another word.